Okay, so we're going to work on exercise 227 today, which is intended to work on creating two-dimensional drawings from Rhino. And this is something that's evolved a bit in my teaching strategy. I used to show you guys how to do this maybe for one day out of the semester. And in watching people that have moved on to 220 and 221, I think this is probably one of the more important things that we discuss. Because you guys pick up on Rhino, you start modeling in Rhino, you do a lot of the work in Rhino. That's exactly what's happening in 220. And you have this great model, and how do you actually produce something worthwhile out of it? And all too often with 3D models, you can end up not having the best looking plans and sections while you might have great renderings because you didn't really know how to get the good quality plans, sections, elevations, and that sort of thing out of Rhino. And so I'm going to spend the next 3 or 4 class days discussing kind of these drawing strategies. And so how do you get, and we'll go through, we'll do elevations, we'll do plans, we'll do sections so that you can see each one of them. The steps will be repetitive, but I'm still going to go through and I'll walk through it live so you guys can see me do it and you have some idea. I recognize that the exercise 227 handout is incredibly short. Part 1, step 1, follow assembly 10.8. The reason that it's short is because I actually spent a lot of time writing this out for you. So if you go to tutorials and you go to assemblies and you go to 10.8, you get this write out, which has a ton of information about exactly what I'm going through. You can see that there's a bunch of steps, and I include a bunch of images and that sort of thing so that you can have those highlighted to get you to the point where you have roughly the image that's at the bottom of this page. Well, which is not the best elevation in the world. It's not the worst elevation in the world. If I were spending a little bit more time with it, I would emphasize more things that you can do with it in Illustrator, but Illustrator is beyond the scope of this class, so I'm showing you a few of the basics to learn a few things in Illustrator to make it look decent. Anyway, so we're gonna go through, but recognize that this whole thing is written up so that you can follow that and see exactly what I do to start to establish this. So I went ahead and I opened up my Rhino file that has my building in it, and I've continued to make little updates along the way to kind of see what's going on. And we're going to do 2 parts. The first thing that we're going to concentrate on is a command that's called Make2D. And the purpose of a Make2D is to create a 2-dimensional line drawing of a 3-dimensional view. And so you can do it, and it's often done, of perspective views. Where you establish a particular perspective view, you say make 2D, and it'll make a line drawing that you can then take into Illustrator and collage over the top, etc. So it's a very, very useful command, but we're going to use it today to do an elevation. And so when I'm doing this elevation, the first thing that I have to decide, obviously, is what elevation am I going to do of this particular building. So in this case, I kind of have 2 elevations that are worthwhile, one being this front elevation, and one being this side elevation. An elevation from the back side really isn't going to give me a whole lot. Right? Likewise, an elevation from this side really isn't going to give me a whole lot. So I'm not asking for all 4 elevations. I'm asking for 1 elevation. So pick the one that looks the best when you decide what to show. So the one that I showed on the handout is this elevation here. To make things slightly different, I'm going to do this elevation from the side just so that you're not seeing exactly the same repetition of steps here. Essentially, it's the same general concept. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch first. Right now I'm in the perspective view where lines recede away the further away they are from me. I'm going to switch into something called the parallel projection. And I'm going to do that by making sure no objects are selected and coming over here into my properties and changing from perspective to parallel. And so it really changes the overall look of this quite a bit. And so you can see when I look at it, if I'm looking straight at my object here, I'm kind of getting a flat view where no lines are receding. Right? They're flat. And so now I need to actually set my view so that I'm looking at one side of my building. And I have a couple options when it comes to doing this. My building happens to be on the XY plane. So it makes life relatively easy. I can actually switch, so I can go to set view, and I could go to, I forget whether it's my left or my right view. It looks like it's my left view. I can go to set view, left, and I could see the left view of my building, right? The projection stays parallel, so that works out just fine for what I'm trying to do, right? If I didn't have an elevation that was orthogonal in the X and Y, such that I could use one of those, I can also orient the camera. I can go to Set Camera, Orient Camera to Surface, and that would allow me to orient to whatever the major surface is in my building. And so if you have one of those cases where your building is not on the XY grid and you're kind of skewed at an angle, let me know and I'll help you do that to establish that. So now I'm going to zoom in slightly so that I get a pretty good idea of where my building falls. This is going to be the final output that I'm going to be looking for. So I want to make sure that I've set it up, positioned it in the viewport the way that I want. Once I get there, I'm going to go to the Set View, Named Views, and I'm going to name this view my, this would be my west elevation. Sorry, I had to think about that for a second. So I'm going to name it the west elevation, and I should have named it without a space. Hold on a second. Well, it won't matter for today, but in the future, try to make it without a space. Okay, so I have west elevation saved, and I'll be able to come back to this particular view. And so if I were to do a Make 2D right from here, which I'm going to do, I can type Make 2D. I'm going to come back and do this again, so I'll go through this part rather fast because I want to point something out. So I'm going to say Make 2D, and we'll say the current view, and we'll go ahead and say OK. And I go to look at my 2D. It's here, right? There's my building as it's established. But I get a whole bunch of the extra stuff. See how I get the whole landscape? I get the ocean that goes way out to the sides and whatever. It's pretty hard to orient this to another view. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to do something else with this view before I do it. So let's switch this view into perspective so that we can kind of see in and look at my object here. Sometimes we have to look at this in multiple views here. Okay, and then I'm going to select the west elevation, and I'm going to choose to show the camera of this elevation. So I'm going to go to Set Camera, and I'm going to say Show Camera. Now remember, when I show the camera, it doesn't actually show up in the view that I'm in. It shows up in all the other viewports. So if we look here in the perspective view, see this really long set of lines here that go out there? That is the camera for this elevation view. It also shows up right here as this rectangle. You guys see that rectangle okay? Okay. That rectangle represents the size of the viewport that I was just looking at. Okay. So what I need to do is I need to draw a rectangle that represents the size of this viewport. So when I do the Make 2D, I get a nice rectangle that represents the viewport. This, by the way, is written out in step-by-step, and it's right here under Rhino 5.37, Viewport Rectangle. So if you get a little bit lost, you can look at it right here, and it'll walk you through how this works. And it points out what I'm about to point out. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and use just a rectangle corner to corner. It's not a surface. It's just a plain line rectangle. And I'm going to draw from, there's a point right here in the center. And I may have to orbit around a little bit to see it. There it is right there. I'm going to draw from that point out to that point. Right there. That then gives me, or it should give me a rectangle. It looks like I messed that up. Hold on a second. There's that point. Right there. To that point right there. There we go. So there's that rectangle. It's exactly a quarter the size of the overall viewport, so I have to do a scale. It's just a regular scale. And I'll go from here to there, and it's actually double in size. Oops, I should have just done 2. Let me scale from that point. I'll type in 2 because it's double the size. It makes life easy. Okay, so now I have that rectangle, and if I were to look at it in this west elevation view, you can see that I just barely see the edges of it inside my view. Do you guys, I don't know if you can see it. See that yellow ever so slightly? That is then representative of this view when I go do the export. Okay? So I have that established. The other thing that's useful sometimes is to show the contours because it's not quite as attractive looking with just the ground. So I'm going to go ahead and put the contours in as well. So let me go ahead and create a new layer. And we can put this layer, I'm going to call this topo contours. And I'm going to put this under the environment layer, make it active. And now I'm going to contour this surface and hopefully that surface all together. So I'm going to type contour. My base point is going to be right there. My direction perpendicular is going to be in the z direction, right, like that. And my interval is going to be something that would be attractive. I'm looking at this as an elevation, so maybe 2 feet, 1 foot, something like that. So I'll try 2 feet. And this is going to take a bit of time because it's going to have to do a bunch of little contours before we even see them in the west elevation view, because they're much tighter than we've been doing. There they are. Perfect. So I have those contours now established. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the west elevation. I'm going to make sure that it is exactly the same west elevation view that I picked and saved, which is right there. I'll deselect everything so I'm looking just at this scene. And now I'm going to go ahead and type Make 2D. It's also under Curve from Objects, Make 2D, I think. No, apparently not. I don't know. I always type it, so I forget where it is. It's in there somewhere. OK, so select objects to draw. I can select all by typing all and then enter. There is also a shortcut to select just the visible objects. It's SELVISIBLE, so select visible. I can press enter to use the entire view, which selects everything that's visible. I want to make sure that there are no objects that are locked when I do this, because I obviously want the, so in my particular case, everything's unlocked, so I'm ready to go. And I'll go ahead and press enter. Oops, hold on a second. I wanted to include the topo lines. So let's make 2D, select visible, which selects all of those. Then I also wanted to include the topography. So let me select the topo lines, which are now selected. I'll go ahead and press enter. And it brings up the Make 2D drawing options. Okay? So we have a variety of options. The first thing is under Drawing Layout, I want just the current view. I could choose to do all 4 views if I had 4 views showing. For the most part, you just want to stick with 1 view because that's all that you really care about. So I'll stick with the current view. Right? Now I have some other options here. I'm going to check the box for Show Hidden Lines because when I see through an object, I'm going to want to be able to dash the hidden lines behind. On this little handout, you can actually see, if you look at the building themselves, there's a bunch of little dashed lines in there. Okay? Those represent hidden objects, and it can be useful for the overall drawing to have that checked. So I'm going to check the box for Show Hidden Lines. The other choice that we have is a box for maintaining source layers. And so this means when it makes 2D, it will make objects that are on the walls layer stay on the walls layer. And objects that are on something else will stay on that kind of a layer, as opposed to grouping all the hidden objects together and all the visible objects together. So it's a different way of doing the layers. If you're more comfortable in Illustrator, you probably want to check to maintain the source layers, because then you can identify certain layers and adjust line thicknesses by layer and that sort of thing. For most of you who aren't as familiar in Illustrator, I'm going to recommend not checking that box, because it'll give you just 2 layers when you move into Illustrator: the hidden lines and the visible lines. And keep it simple. So I just want to point that out, that that's a choice that you can make. Down here, It says layers for make 2D objects. This is just if we're going to use any of these layers, we can specify what layers they're going to show up on manually. The defaults are just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And we're going to let Rhino process for a little bit. This has sped up significantly. Speeded is a good word, right? This is sped up significantly from the old days. It still can take a while. And so you just have to be patient while it creates it. Yeah?
Do you use system for speeding up this process?
System? No. No. It's just you're reliant on your, yep. Okay, so it went ahead and it finished. Didn't take too long. And so I'm going to switch out of the west elevation view, and I'm going to move into the top view. And in the top view, I'm going to see my objects right here and all of those lines. And so let me go ahead and move these off to the side for a second. And then let's zoom selected. Okay, so what we see here is we see, why didn't it? Hold on a second. We have to go back. I didn't select the, I should have just make 2D with all the views here. Let me go back and go to set view, west elevation. Why did everything? I failed to select the box, the viewport box. So one more time, make 2D. I'm just going to say all. So what if I draw them all? And we'll go ahead and do this again. My options, current view, show hidden lines. So I have visible and hidden. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And then now we have to wait again. So sorry, bear with me. OK, so it just made it again. And I apologize for that delay. Go into the top view yet again. And I'm going to go ahead and move this whole object from its current position. We'll move it up over here. And now I can zoom in. And we see, this is what I made a mistake with last time, that this rectangle then represents the view that I was just looking at. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and click off of this, and I'm going to clean it up. So I'll use that viewport rectangle right here. Take both sides of it there. And I'll use that as a trim. So I'm going to type trim, and I'm going to get rid of all of these lines that are outside of it. And anything that's up above. Yeah, okay. Sounds good. I'll hit enter to finish, and then we'll delete the rest of these pieces because this is all information that I don't need. That's the risk when you select all when you do the Make 2D. You get way more information than you actually need. All right, so we're back to where I have just this showing. Okay. Before I do the export to Illustrator, I need to move this to 0.00 because otherwise the export won't work out very well. So I'll type 000 and let me zoom selected. And there it is. Again, in the top view, we see my whole building, and we see all the contours. And from here, I'm going to go to File, Export, Selected. And I'm going to specify under the Save As type to do Adobe Illustrator.ai. And so let me go ahead and save it to my flash drive. Today is 2/27. This is the west elevation. There, one. Now, under Options, I'm going to click on Options. And I wrote this up to hopefully make a little bit more sense when you look at this assembly tutorial here. As we come down here, when we get to the Options, this is where you're going to specify the scale of your final drawing. And so I'm going to do it at 1/4 inch equals a foot. And because I want 1/4 inch equals a foot, it's going to be 48 inches equals 1 inch in the drawing units. Okay? So we'll come back to my Rhino file, and we're going to preserve the model scale. 48 inches is going to be 1 inch. I'll go ahead and say OK. And then I'll go ahead and say Save. And it brings it up again. I'll go ahead and say OK. All right, so I have that, and I'm going to go ahead and open that in Adobe Illustrator. So I'll open Illustrator from the Start menu here. And I know some of you have never taken 135. Some of you have never even opened Illustrator. I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible for the post-processing. But this is a natural flow from a 2D object into some program to make some adjustments so that you can then post it on a final board. I'm going to go ahead and go to File and then Open, and I'm going to open that file that I just saved. And it was the west elevation. I'll go ahead and say Open, and it will then show up in my view here. Press Control-0 so we can see it. Now notice that the size of the white space in Illustrator is different than the size of my model. Right? My drawing actually goes over here. I'm going to change that by clicking on the Artboard tool, which is right here. Looks kind of like a crop. And I'm just going to drag this to match the rectangle that I have. This looks like a... And it should kind of snap into place when you get close. All right, once I'm done, I'll go back and click on the black arrow here. And so now I have a drawing. If I press Control-0, I can see the whole drawing. And I have 2 layers. And so over here, if I click on the Layers palette, it'll show up. I can also go to Window and then Layers to make sure that I can see it. I have two layers. And this is where I was saying, if you exported it by keeping the source layers, you'd have a bunch of layers listed here. For what I'm doing, I wanted it to be simple. We just have 2 layers. Okay? We have one that's hidden and one that's visible. Okay? First thing is, let's adjust the visible layers. And so one, we want the visible to be on top of the hidden. Why they're not in that order to begin with, I don't know. So I'm just going to drag visible on top of hidden, like that. Then I'm going to select all of the objects that are on the visible layer by clicking right next to this circle. And when I click right there, I get a little black box that shows up, and it selects a bunch of objects on the page. Okay? I now need to make an adjustment to the stroke. And again, this is written up. There's the crop, right, as we come down here. There's the little square that we're trying to select. Here is the stroke. These are the adjustments that I'm going to make. Okay? So I'll come over here. I'll go to stroke. If you don't see all of these options, you may have to click this little triangle and say show options. It may or may not be visible. All right, so then I'm going to adjust the thickness of the lines. And so in this case, I'll go to 1.5 points, like that, so they're a little bit thicker. Right? And the lines are already all black. We can see that right here. They're already all black. So that's all I really need to do for the visible lines. Right? They're just a little bit thicker. We can see them. Okay? Now I want to select all of the hidden lines. So the hidden lines are right here. Again, I'm going to click on this little box next to it. There it is. It's very difficult to sense that I've selected those because they're all white. So once I have the box, I'm going to trust that they're selected, and I'm going to change their color. So right here, I'll double click, and I'll change their color to maybe be 75% gray or 90% gray or something like that. Let's go a little darker. Let's go 90%. No, 85. I'll go ahead and say OK, and now we can kind of see those lines a little bit better. Again, they're very faint. I'm going to come over here to the stroke menu, and we're going to change the width to be 0.5 points. And I'm going to make them dashed. And I'm going to do a 4-point dash by, say, a 2-point dash, like that. And now, if I click off, we'll see that I have nice bold lines, and then I have a bunch of dashed lines that represent the stuff that's inside my building. Okay? It adds a little depth. It adds a little look to the overall piece. Okay? I may also elect to change the topo lines to be something other than just the black. I might change the thickness or whatever. We'll come back to that. There's also a few lines in here that really shouldn't be there. Like, I have no idea what that diagonal line is, but it doesn't need to be there. So let's go ahead and get rid of it. Right? Likewise, I don't know what this diagonal line is, or this one. Get rid of that. This one probably should go away. That one doesn't look like it belongs there. We'll get rid of that. So we're trying to clean things up a little bit. Likewise, this one really shouldn't be there. That's just a seam in my surface. I'm just pressing the delete key. Yeah? Yeah, this one was part of the surface, but I don't think I need it there because the surface, in reality, would be seamless. So we'll get rid of a couple more of those little diagonals. If you didn't get rid of these, it's probably not the end of the world because it's just me being picky about what I'm looking at. Oops, that was not what I wanted. There it is. All right, let me press Control 0, and we can see the whole thing again. I have no idea what this line is up here either. Let's get rid of that. It's not helping anything right now. All right, so now I have this overall piece. Okay, it looks pretty good as a line drawing. It could probably work, but I can take this a step further and I can add a little bit more to it. And I'm going to do that by doing something that's called a clay rendering. So I'm going to jump back to my original file here, and I'm going to go to my west elevation view. Okay, so we're back at the west elevation view. I can turn off all of the Make 2D layers so that they're just off and gone. And so right now, if I were to render this, I'd get a daytime. This happened to be my daytime model. I'd get a daytime view with the sun, shadows, and all that sort of thing. I don't really want full color because this is supposed to be a line drawing. So instead of that, I want just a little bit of tone, a little bit of shadow. And I'm going to do that using the clay rendering. And so I have a write-up of how that part works. So if we come down here, let me find where it is. Looks like I did this slightly out of order. I apologize. Where's the clay? Here's the clay renderings. This is an example image of the clay rendering. It's hard to see. It's just a little bit of subtle shadow that's going to go behind. Okay? So let me go ahead and show you a walkthrough of that. I'll open this up so you can see it. All right. The first thing that we need is this clay render visopt file. I know I've already downloaded it to my flash drive, so I'm not going to download it, but you should download it. Okay? And I'm going to go ahead and load that. So again, this is probably a good time to save this work before I do it. And I probably should have saved as before I started messing with it. So let's go ahead and do that too. Of course. Go to File, Save As. And let's say this is elevations. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open the V-Ray options here, and I'm going to load a preset. So I'm going to click on the load button. I'm going to go to my flash drive, into my resources folder. I have my visopt settings, and I'm going to pick the clayrender.visopt. I'll go ahead and say open. I'm doing this on purpose so that you guys don't have to do too much work with this part. Okay? So it reloads a bunch of settings, but there are still a few things that I need to do. Okay? So I've loaded the clay render visopt. Now I'm going to override the materials with white. So I have all of my materials already applied, right? But I don't want those materials anymore. I just want white. So I'm going to go back to my Rhino file here. And under System, under Global Switches, there's a checkbox for Override Materials. And I want to override them with white. And I'll say OK. If you don't get enough shadow, you could override them with light gray. It's just kind of a matter of preference. So what this is doing is it's taking away all the materials that I have applied, and it's applying just a basic gray material to it, which is going to allow this to render out much, much faster. Okay? So I have that done. Right? I'm also going to uncheck the box for lights, which will turn off all the lights. So let me jump back. There's the box for lights. I'll turn off all the lights. What this is just generic lighting. There's nothing fancy in it. And I'll go ahead and look at the output here. And this is something that some of you may have missed by right now. But I want the output to exactly match the window that I'm looking at, because that was obviously what I exported when I did the line drawing. So I'm going to click this Get View Aspect button, and it will change the view aspect to match the exact view that I have. Then I can click on this L button here, which will lock the view, and then I can increase the size of the rendering. Right? So I'll go up larger. If we wanted to go, if I were doing this, I would probably go up even larger. I'd maybe go to 3,000 or 4,000, but for the time, we'll leave it at 2048. And so now that I have those settings correct, I'll go ahead and I'll render it. Let me make sure that I don't have distributed rendering on. Good. And I'll go ahead and render. So this should render very, very quickly because it has no lights and no materials. Okay, so it just finished. It was very quick. You see that I get just a little bit of shadow in here, just a little bit of shadow, and just a little bit of shadow. Okay? I'll go ahead and I'll save this view. And I'll save it to my flash drive. All right, and so we'll call this west. Let me make a folder for west elevation. 01, and let's call this west elevation basic, and I'll go ahead and click on save. And so this is the most basic way of creating a little bit of clay rendering behind, just a subtle bit of shadow. Okay? Now, I can, however, take this a little bit further, and I can apply a little bit more to it. And so the tutorial continues here with some more options. Right? In this section, I'm going to mimic the way the sun looks and actually have some sun applied on my scene. Okay? So again, it's more steps, but it makes the shadows a little deeper. It might make it look a little bit better, but I want to present it as an option. So this is kind of the minimum, and if I want to take it a little bit further, we'll work on it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select the sun here for a second, and I'm going to go over to my properties under my light, and I'm going to make a node. I'm going to click on Modify Sun. Come on. Maybe. Oh, really? Maybe I'm not. All right, well, that's totally not working. All right, maybe now. Nope, apparently. Okay, let me try to restart Rhino and see if I can get it, because it's not gonna work if I don't do it. All right, so I just had to restart Rhino. I want to make a note of two things: the azimuth and the altitude, which is 229.7 and 23.2. And what I'm going to do is create a directional light that's in the same direction. So let me go ahead and create a line. And we'll just draw a line that's straight here. Let me set my C-plane to world top. I don't know why it's not in world top. There we go. All right, and I'm going to rotate this by negative 223 degrees. Never mind, that's not right. I should have drawn it. Should have rotated it from this end. Negative 223. How about 223? There we go. And now I need to rotate 3D. Oh, darn it. Did this out of order. This, by the way, I should have followed my own tutorial, is written up right here for how you do it. And so I apologize. Altitude first, then azimuth. All right, so let me rotate 3D. Axis, this is the 23.2 degrees. Help if I did it the correct direction. Negative 23.2, there we go. Now rotate by the 227. I'm backwards here. There it is. So I have that line that I'm going to use to work with my basic directional light. Target and line. Once I have that in place, I can safely turn off the sun, which is the whole point of this. So let me turn off the sun. And now that I have that light in place, we're going to go back to the west elevation view. I'm going to go back into my V-Ray options, and I'm going to set my camera to be on and at about 20 of shutter speed. And we'll go ahead and do a render again. So you can see that this time I get a little bit better results out of the shading. It's a subtle difference. Let me go ahead and save this one, and we can look at them side by side. Save. Let me go to the Start menu here, and I'm just going to pull them up side by side so you can see the difference. All right, so that was the first one, right? Very subtle, not too much shadow. Right, this is the next one, a little bit more shadow, a little bit better color rendering. So again, very subtle in the difference, but slightly better. Again, up to you whether you want to take the extra steps to do it. So now it's just a matter of jumping back into my Illustrator file here and bringing that image in. So I'm going to go to File and then Place, and I'm going to bring in my advanced image. The good news is that these should line up almost perfectly once I adjust the size. So I'm going to go ahead and use this free transform tool, and I'm going to make this side line up right there. Oops. It's right on the edge, and I'll make this side line up right there. And once those two line up, you can see that I now have a little bit of shading behind what was otherwise be a flat drawing. And you can see this here. I should have put this on its own layer here. So that you can see it a little bit better. So there it is with it, there it is without it. So it's subtle. It's just a little bit of extra shadow, but it can really make a big difference in the overall drawing of it. Okay? So again, up to you as to how much you do. I threw in there that you can also drop a texture behind it, which can be beneficial. I'm going to show you that, but it's probably way over all your heads anyway, so whatever, you can just ignore me for a while, right? But what I'm going to do is, with that selected, I'm going to come over here to the transparency mode here. And, I have to embed the object first. Let me embed the object. And then I'm going to make a mask and apply to this a grunge texture, which I can get off my flash drive. Let me just make this a little bit bigger like this. And then we'll go back. And so all that does is, Control-0, it just adds a little bit of texture to it. And you can barely even see that I did it in this version. Okay? So the point is, I know it's a lot of steps, but this is how to create a line drawing from your Rhino file. If you can master this as a set of steps, it will make your life very, very easy when you move on to 220. Because you'll be able to pop out elevations and sections and plans very, very easily. So this was an elevation view. Next class we'll go through and we'll do plan view. Then we'll do a section view, and then we'll do a perspective. So we're kind of moving our way through the whole set so you can see how they all work together. Okay? So if a little bit went past you this time, we're going to repeat the whole thing again with a couple tweaks to do a plan, and you'll see the whole process again. All right? Any global questions? No? Remember that you still need to make a post for exercise 227. I would love it to be an elevation, but at least if you work on your project and post something, you'll get credit for 227, right? So do something and post it.